Thanks for joining. It's great. We've got session 2. We're putting our entrepreneurs in residence to work, which we love talking about things that they're passionate about, which is great. Let me just sort of kick off, and we'll probably have some more folks joining. And I know we're streaming on LinkedIn Live. Just for quick intros, I'm Michael Goldberg. I'm our executive director for the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship here at Case and professor at the business school. It's great to welcome Zach Fleitman back to our speaker series / workshop series. Today's topic is going to focus on starting a healthcare company. Zach was nice enough to join us last week with folks around the art of pitching, which was actually a great session that really broadened beyond just pitching your business to a venture fund, but also kind of pitching along the way, and even for our students as they think about pitching themselves, which is something we do all the time. That was great. So thank you for doing that, Zach. And that, in addition to all of our sessions, are available, the recordings on our websites if you want to watch later. Today's session is going to be moderated by Amanda Mosier, who's a sophomore biochemistry pre-med student here at Case. She, unfortunately for me, is a Steelers fan, so we were talking some Browns Steelers smack.
I see a thumbs up. I like it.
Which there was no smack talking from me. It's all bad. Still recovering from that. I don't know, Zach, I know you married into Cleveland. Are you a Browns fan or?
I'm one of the few teams that no matter the week will put up a more embarrassing week than the Browns. I'm a Giants fan. So
I was gonna guess Jets or Giants. But
yeah. So I'm experienced with Odell Beckham, and I was excited to follow him to the Browns, and I hope once again to see him live as soon as we're allowed to make our way into the dog pound.
Great. And I see Brad Goldstrom, who's a biomedical engineering student, has joined us. I know Xiaoyang Wang is with us as well in the Pittsburgh area. And Bob, I know we were having a little trouble hearing you before. I don't know if you want to test your microphone. We still can't hear you. So if you have any questions, maybe put them in the chat. But we want this to be interactive. And for those that are watching on LinkedIn Live, just put your comment into the LinkedIn Live stream comment bar, and Doug and I will be monitoring. So with that, let me turn it over to Amanda, who's going to run the show and hopefully not talk about Ben Roethlisberger.
Great. Yeah, I guess we'll, move away from football into the business side of things. But thank you for the introduction. Really excited for this. So I think whenever we spoke, we'd love to kind of group this into 2 subsections around 2 focal points. So we'll kind of talk about career development, and then we'll move into starting your own company and advice and insight on that. As Michael mentioned, if you have any questions, we'd love for this to be interactive. So either, if your camera's on, you can physically raise your hand or interject in the chat. I'll be looking at that. Anything works. But just to start off, Zach, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what made you decide to pursue a career in entrepreneurship and startup companies?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much. Amanda's done a lot of work behind the scenes here. It's hard to herd cats when that cat specifically is someone that likes to talk a lot, but she's done a good job of organizing me here. So, my background, I'm from Massachusetts originally. That might not jive with the Giants fandom. My dad's from the Bronx, so I inherited some of that. I went to school in the Midwest, came back to the East Coast in financial services. So I was in healthcare investment banking for a couple of years. Invested in healthcare and consumer products from the private equity perspective. Really wanted to explore the operating side of the world. So went to one of our portfolio companies to do a turnaround, a healthcare consumer product company. Fell in love with it and basically moved into early stage. So the 8 years before I moved to Ohio, I helped launch 2 healthcare startups, one a connected medical device company called Kinsa, and another a healthcare IT company that helps healthcare facilities coordinate post-discharge care for patients. So making sure patients get the equipment, the services, the home nurses they need once they transition from a physical location into their own homes. In both situations, I was a first 5 pre-revenue employee. focused on launching and growing operations, finance parts of the org. My wife is a Clevelander, and she matched for her residency at UH. And so I followed her here. And so I'm currently the CFO at a managed mobility services company based in Independence.
Great. So, and speaking of the two companies that you worked for, I know you said you were part of a 5-member team at first. What kind of insight did you gain from working in such a close-knit group starting off your career?
Yeah, and apologies, the dog was causing some ruckus next to me. So, I realized I didn't answer one of your questions to start, which is, why did I go to an early stage company? I went to an early stage company because I really wanted to get a wholesome view in a kind of trial by fire view of how to launch and grow a business and how to operate a business. And, at that point in time, I had done 5 years in later stage companies, financial services, but also, a little bit in the operations side. And I wanted a company very early stage because I wanted to have to take on the responsibility and have to take on control of the areas of the organization. And so I was looking specifically for organizations of that size. What I learned when being there was just exactly what that entails. I mean, you don't have really any of the infrastructure that's put in place to track what you're doing, to track how you as an individual is doing, how your kind of organizations, your departments are doing. There's just no infrastructure. You have to do it yourself. You have to learn, versus when you're in a later stage company, you can make up for falling behind by working hard and working longer. In a early stage company, in a 5-person company, there's almost an endless supply of work. But there's not an endless supply of hours. So if you try to force your way through it, you're gonna find out sooner rather than later you have to work smart versus hard. But it's also really nice, you have a small team, you bond with that team, you do see everything, you have visibility into everything. A problem a lot of companies run into when they scale out, probably when they hit like 25, 30 people, is that it's really challenging to communicate the direction of the company across the whole organization. So you might get work where you don't fully understand what the purpose of your work is, how that work fits into the larger goals of the organization, unless that organization is running really well, in which case they do a good job of disseminating information across their employees. But that's something that you have to have in a small company, and it's very educational. It's very interesting, and it definitely empowers you to work the crazy hours that come with working in early stage organization. I mean, you're not working 9 to 5, you're not working 8 to 6 if you're a 5-person company. You're putting in 70, 80 hours a week kind of at a minimum, especially if you're taking on meaningful ownership of what you're doing.
Great. So what kind of skills do you feel prepared you to work in that, small scale team to begin with, and then branch out from there? Like, what kind of experiences did you have that you were able to learn from and take into larger scale companies?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a bit, and I think this gets back to the beginning, to like a fundamental question. You may be asking this later, so I apologize. You can interrupt me, which is like, when would I encourage early stage someone to go work in an early storage organization or start your own? I immensely benefited from working at the later stage organizations that I started my career with, the financial organizations. So a couple years, like I said, a couple years in IBD, a couple years in private equity, and 1 year in a $300 million operating company. The number one set of skills is just like how to communicate and how to present yourself in a professional environment. I mean, it sounds simple, but it is something you have to learn. How to give a presentation, whether it be internal or external, in a way, kind of in both situations, not to harken back to the pitch presentation of last week, but you're selling something, or you have a point. You should have a point to your presentation in terms of what you're trying to, whether you're trying to say we should take this approach, or this is how this approach is working and this is how we should adjust it, or hey, we want some external party to do this. You're trying to get across a point, and how to get across that point in a concise, understandable way, so that the people around the table, see the work you've done and are convinced by the work you've done. I think that presentation skills is something that you almost learn in any large organization. And that's something large organizations specifically try to apply. Public speaking, presentations, emails, whether you learn by doing it or you learn by being assigned a mentor, those large organizations are larger because they're successful, because they've seen how to do things well. And, because they already have that success, they're more likely to be better able to teach you. But also because they've had that success and have the resources, they actually have the time and resources to teach you. So 5 years of later stage organizations help prepare me with a foundational skill set that presentation, another one was organization, self-organization, seeing what good and bad management looks like those mental skill sets were invaluable when I went to launch a company. And I still had to learn a lot by doing, and I still learned a lot. Frankly, I love the founders and CEOs of the first two companies I worked with, and I worked with them very close. And I talked to them today. It's still a two-way street in terms of I help them with recruiting, they help me, and we pick each other's brains a lot. But I learned a lot by seeing what not to do. Right, you see the things that don't work. I think in a larger company, you probably learn more by training, by specific intended training, by seeing what good managers look like, because that's who sticks around typically in a large organization. By earlier organizations, that split is, you'll be lucky if it's 50-50 what to do versus what not to do. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the time I encourage people that are early in their career to spend a couple years at a successful organization first, just because they get people that are focused on investing in them, and that have the resources and experience to invest in them. And this is another part of the conversation we had, which is if you are fresh out of college and you're trying to pick a startup to work at, you're betting that both with your time and your career development that you can identify the managers at a startup that are going to grow a successful business, and they're going to be able to show you through example how to do that. And that's something VCs aren't good at. And VCs do it professionally. They're not good at picking winners. To believe that you have, close to no experience in the working world can identify what's there, and who are the managers that can help you build a skill set that allow you to be a winner. It's tough. It's very tough to do. And so I get, if you're really committed to that early stage, put in some diligence as to, why you believe that founder is going to be successful. But it's a much more challenging proposition.
Great. So going off of, all that advice and those experiences, I'd love to hear from your recent experiences at Vox, kind of what you've learned there, about how you mentioned of what works in the company, what you don't think works in the company, and kind of how you internalize that knowledge to, what your plans are for the future and what, students as looking to create startups should think about doing.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I like to try to look objectively at my career, which is a challenge. And I encourage everyone to look at what they think they want. Start with a general outline of where they think they want to be. Wait But Why is a great website. They actually have one on Career Path. So if you Google Wait But Why in Career Path, they have a really interesting article. It's really long though. But I like to look and say, okay, so where do I think I want to go? What are the foundational skill sets I need to get there? And how do I build them in the next step I'm taking? So for me, it was, I wanted to found my own company. I wanted to be CEO. I saw the stat when I was reading 70% of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies come from sales. So I knew that sales was something that was missing when I got to the early stage side of the world. So I specifically, talked with each founder I talked to, hey, can I get exposure to the sales side? Will you teach me the sales side? And I've had a couple founders that were really good at sales, and they really took me under their wing in terms of doing this. So I think it's good to kind of map out your best guess at your career, and then figure out what are the steps to get there. You're gonna be wrong, right? You're gonna change what you want to do. But that's another thing that's really great, is if you're targeting what the step to get to where you want to go and you don't like it, that forces you to take a look at, okay, do I really want to get there? Is this really the best path to do it? So it forces you to answer the questions, and you'll figure it out as you way. My first stop in terms of earlier stage stuff taught me a lot about, just getting how challenging it is to get something off the ground, especially on the hardware side. The first stop was hardware. But it gave me a lot of really great skills on the sales side. It made me, question, okay, do I want to sell 100% of the time, which is what you have to do really as a founder, unless you're purely a technical founder and you have a co-founder that's on the sales side. The next company afterwards, it taught me a lot of the skills of like, okay, then we got to a later stage, right? I left at probably low single digits in terms of millions. First company, I left closer to double digits of millions of revenue with the second company, national scale on the software side. And so like I saw a lot, like I saw later team development too. And so we ran into the problems of what happens when you hit 50 people internally. And so I was like trying to internalize what I had learned as like a 3-year experience individual at like a $300 million operating company, which was the company I worked at, and then two 4-year stints, or a 3-year and a 4-year stint at early stage companies. And I was like, I'd be really interested to see what I'd learn having these questions and seeing these stumbling blocks from these early stage companies to a company that made it past this stage. And so, Vox was a really successful startup coming out of the greater Cleveland area. And now they're past kind of that startup phase. They're around 150 employees, large book of business with blue chip names, but they're not too far past it. They're not to the stage where everything has totally stabilized on like the best processes and best practices internally. So they're at a really interesting point where they've made it past, like they're going to survive, right? They're past the startup phase, but but there's room for improvement. And there's room for professionalization of management, which is, how the current CEO who's successful exits under his belt came to be part of the team and came to lead the team. And seeing someone that's done it multiple times successfully and seeing a company that's made it to this stage shows you where good processes and bad processes take companies. And so you can see the areas where they had less experienced management and spent less time investing in, I don't want to say automating, but processes that make it so there's less manual intervention on a regular basis. Just seeing where the investment was for growth versus where they kind of just continued to hack it together. And you see the outcome, right? You see all the little things we were doing well in the last two companies and all the little mistakes we knew we were making at the last two companies, which ones blew up and which ones didn't. And there's a great concept, which is, and I said this, right? You have more than enough work in a startup. You always have too much work. There are problems, and I like to call these fires, because there's a Masters of Scale podcast that's really good. That's another one that one I would encourage everyone to read. It's really interesting. But one podcast from the Airbnb guys, I think it was fires to let burn and fires to not. There's too many problems. There's too many fires. You can't put all the fires out. You'll drive yourself insane putting all the fires out. But you don't have to. You have to figure out the fires that are going to burn down the company and the fires that aren't. And I think seeing some later stage companies, you then start to identify there are fires that people never put out. Amazon still has a terribly wonky search algorithm sometimes with 10 different products that are really the same product show up when you do a search. They have more than enough money to fix that. Why aren't they fixing it? Because it's a fire that they've never had to fix. If they can avoid spending, 10, 20, $100 million on fixing this algorithm and people still keep coming back and still do the majority of their shopping on the site, why fix it? And that's what they've gotten to. They've gotten to the point where investing those dollars in other areas makes sense. You see that everywhere. And I think starting to understand which of the fires that you can let burn and which ones aren't is really valuable. And you see that more when you have kind of the combination of both early stage and later stage experience. Was that what you were trying to get at? Was that helpful?
Yeah, I think that was perfect. And I see the link to the Masters of Scale was dropped in the chat. So for anyone who wants to check it out, it's there, which is great. And we actually have our first audience question. So thank you to Brad for having a question. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask it, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda, and hi, Zach. So it sounds like I may have similar aspirations to you to enter into healthcare entrepreneurship. We may have approached it through different paths. I'm studying biomedical engineering, more of a science side, and it sounds like you came from more of a business and finance side. Can you shed any insight on what it was like to come from that background and go into the healthcare industry, and then also the dynamics that you may have found when working in a really small group with people who are more like healthcare and science oriented?
Yeah, so you're coming at it from the valuable angle. When you come at it from the business side, it's really challenging to get I had to beg my way into my first startup. Like I'm not ashamed to admit this. The CEO I talked to, who, like I said, he was at my wedding. I was at his wedding. When I first showed up, he said, "I don't want anyone with a finance background. You guys don't know how to work in teams. You don't know how to work smart versus hard. You just work hard, and you don't come with tangible skills." And I think a part of that was he's always a sales guy, and he was already negotiating with me. But that being said, I told him, like, listen, I'll work for you for a month. After that, here's my target compensation. I'll let you determine what percentage of that you want to give me in equity and what percentage you want to give me in cash. And I basically earned my way into working there. But it's challenging from a business perspective because you don't have that tangible and that physical skill set. Engineering, coming with being able to actually work on the product itself is always going to be in more demand, especially early stage. If you're a software engineer, if you're a hardware engineer, there's always a demand for you. In healthcare, it moves guys a little bit earlier. Healthcare is such an interesting beast. One, because it's a hat that currently goes on almost a fifth of the economy. So when you say healthcare, what you're really talking about is dozens of sub-industries. Why I really like healthcare is because if you're truly passionate about it, that passion speaks through and it allows you to move in between all the sub-industries, right? Like I've done medical devices, I've done HCIT. In most other industries, those are two completely different industries. They're like, oh, you're passionate about healthcare. Like we share that passion. We can work towards a common goal. Starting a healthcare company, though, is different. The move fast and break something model is a lot more challenging in healthcare because obviously people's lives are at risk. You also have a lot more incumbents, a lot more regulatory red tape. There's a boneyard of people from Silicon Valley and smart startup areas, right, that are like, hey, we just take these really successful business models and port it over to healthcare. It doesn't quite work that way. I think the number one reason is because the incumbents are really powerful and the barriers to entry that they put up is a lot higher. And they have their own innovation departments and they want to own the innovation. You can look at our backyard right here, right? Cleveland Clinic. They own the sandbox. They know they own the sandbox, right? So it gives them a different level of control over who gets to play in it and not. That being said, if you have a really good idea in healthcare, there's always going to be someone that is willing and able to support it, right? Every health system now has an innovation department. There's a lot of money and support out there for people that are looking to have an impact. So it's a great space to be in. I got in it because both my parents are doctors. My sister's a doctor. My wife's a doctor. Her two brothers are doctors. Her dad's a doctor. So I wouldn't be able to sit around the dinner table if I didn't do something in healthcare. But it's also the really nice thing about it is at the end of the day, if you start a company and the company has a mission that your fellow founders and your future employees can get bought into, which usually is the case in healthcare, right? Normally at the end of the day, if you do well, your end users do well, you align your goals, and that it allows you to get talent cheaper, frankly. It allows you to get more talent, allows you to compete with the high-flying tech companies, which typically really overcompensate. It's really hard to match compensation early stage. So you gotta win on mission, you gotta win on passion, and healthcare is a good place to do that. Did that answer your question? Was there a piece of that I didn't get to?
I think that was pretty good. Thank you.
So it looks like we have another question from Bob, and I know his microphone isn't quite working, so I'll read that off for him. So what would you say are the most important things to do when starting a medical product company? Things to get right or go home?
Oh, so product, Bob, you can nod or shake your head on this. When you say product, you mean hardware?
Hardware and software.
Hardware, software, okay. I guess the answer works for both. You got to be very confident that there are incumbents who believe that agree with what you're doing. Because to get any sort of traction in healthcare, you need to be aligned with someone that controls a solid chunk of it. You can go the direct consumer route. There are direct consumer healthcare companies that have been successful. I mean, Kinsa is frankly one of them. They started with a direct consumer device. But man, you're going to save yourself a huge headache if you can align yourself with either a system or a payer. That is the easiest way to, I would say, reduce your chance of failure by like 80-90% is to get someone at a major system, or to get someone get someone at a payer, or get like a real thought leader to stand behind you. Because without some credibility building in terms of logos and companies that work with you, you're going to have a really hard time getting off the ground in healthcare. So I think that would be the main one. And if you don't add value to one of those guys, like if you don't add value to the people that are either controlling the dollars or controlling the flow of patients, you're going to struggle. And the earlier you can get that buy-in, the earlier you'll get de-risked, the easier it'll be to raise money. It's just incumbents are pretty unbeatable right now in healthcare. People disagree with me, but the only people really beating incumbents consistently are either partnering with incumbents or, have huge bankrolls like Amazon, Google, Apple, right? And even those guys are having a hard time. Like they've gotten bloody noses and black eyes from trying to get into healthcare, assuming they could just port over some things that worked in other industries. So both proof of concept, credibility building, and access to actual customers is pretty much all controlled by, I would say, if you can get payers or a system.
So I think Professor Goldberg has a question. So if you want to go ahead and ask that.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, here we go. Here come the big guns, big questions. I want to talk about the pivot as it relates to healthcare. I mean, it's interesting both in kind of spending time with entrepreneurs and with students, the term pivot and the ability, kind of through customer discovery and talking to customers, and the ability for folks to, we all know that when typically when entrepreneurs come up with the original idea, that as they engage with the market, that things are going to take a different twists and turns along the way as customers interact with the product. Because of the regulatory environment, we recognize that the path to market for many healthcare companies takes longer. And the timing to kind of engage and interact with certainly paying customers can be longer. Just from my own experience in investing in healthcare companies, I sort of see the challenge where companies don't get as much real feedback from paying customers, because oftentimes the regulatory environment doesn't allow them to sell. And the ability to sort of pivot along the way, it just might take longer. The fact that you've worked both in healthcare and non-healthcare, I'm sort of curious if you can sort of reflect on the particular challenges that folks in the healthcare space may have. Obviously it doesn't apply to healthcare IT and some of the things that you've sort of worked in, but just sort of some of the challenges as it relates to healthcare and getting feedback from customers along the way.
Yeah. That's a really challenging one, right? Like if you're talking about in the life sciences or medical devices, it's going to be a while before you can really test with paying customers. You're going to need someone with deep pockets that believes in what you're doing, that believes in the science you're doing. Like I said, probably some sort of affiliation is going to be really especially helpful there. And you're going to have to go through those regulatory pathways. You can shortcut it depending on the type of medical device, like whether you're a type 1, type 2, type 3 medical device. Like if you're like a very lightly regulated medical device like the thermometer, you can get something out quickly to customers and be fine. But if you're anything invasive, right, you're meaning anything that goes in the body, you have to go through the various phases. The same with life sciences. So I'm going to ignore those because that's Brad's neck of the woods. Like, you have to have a couple additional letters next to your name, whether it be a PhD or MD, something where they call you doctor. I don't. I can't play in that neck of the woods because I don't feel confident understanding whether even a product that I look at is going to be successful or not, until frankly it's too late, because you don't have that data, because you can't test with users. So I'm going to answer more from the side of HCIT and non-invasive devices and products. Healthcare is a little bit of a double-edged sword, because you have to be a little bit more complete with your product theoretically before you go out there and just test with users, because you can't like test with a hospital, right? There's not a lot of independent hospitals, and there's not a lot of, you can be in the post-acute side of the world and you can do some light testing and whatnot, but that's usually the exception. The other nice thing about healthcare is it's stickier. If you get someone to buy in, if you get any sort of system or incumbent to buy in, you can go to them with a little bit less bake of a product and work with them to build that product out a little bit more than you can if you're like a direct to consumer or even a B2B, but not in healthcare. Meaning that, if you have this like great idea, great technology that will really solve one of their problems and you're really confident about it, like, and you go to them and you sell them on it, your product can be garbage at that initial point. I don't advocate for that, but your product can be garbage, and if they still believe with your ultimate mission, your ultimate vision, they'll work with you to fix it, and they'll give you time. Like, typically they'll be like, you have a year to figure this out and implement it and get everything working. And here are the metrics we want to hit. And you can get that, and you can get scale faster because you don't really have to compete you just get this one buyer at a health system, and all of a sudden they can roll you out to all these different facilities. So you can shortcut scale in healthcare in a way that you can't in a lot of other industries. The threshold is that first customer. The threshold is getting that first customer is higher. You can just kind of go out and kind of ad-lib it. I would say pivots. The concept of pivot in healthcare is interesting because, like, a lot of times it's the go-to-market which you have to pivot. I think a lot of people people that understand healthcare and go into healthcare with an end goal in mind. Their visions are pretty consistent, and they'll end, mostly, there's exceptions, but they'll end with a similar vision that they started with, in terms of, here's a problem that patients aren't getting what they need, and if patients could just get this, the outcomes would be better for everyone. Or if systems and hospitals could just implement this solution, the outcome would be better for everyone. But it's like, how do we get this to be aligned with the way that with the way that dollars flow in healthcare, with the way that patients flow in healthcare? How do we align ourselves with the players to actually get to that point? And a lot of times they'll start and they'll be like, oh, we can go direct to consumer. And oh, wait, no, consumers aren't willing to act like consumers in healthcare. So then, okay, we can go direct to health system. Oh no, health systems aren't actually incentivized to do what's best for the patient in this specific way because their reimbursement is aligned with that. Oh, but we'll go to payer. Okay, but fee-for-service payers don't actually care about this component of care. Oh, I found a managed care provider who actually has to take risk on for a patient population. They'll use this. And that's when you get that blend. And the vision of like the product that you're actually delivering, the technology you're actually delivering to the end user might stay the same, but you pivoted about like which incumbent does this align with. I think that's the kind of pivoting you see the most in healthcare. And I mean, that obviously changes as like, government, what our reimbursement policies are from CMS and whatnot. But like, I think you have to be the pivot that if you have some product that you think is great for the end consumer, and once again, this is less on the life science and medical device device side. On that side, you just have to hit the phases, show it's effective, show it's safe, and you'll get there. Now, 99% of ideas die in that pathway, but whatever. On the other side, it's the pivoting about how you actually deliver it, how you actually bring it to market. But once you find that alignment, you can go from 0 to 100 in terms of scale much faster than other industries, because there's a lot fewer people to sell. Like it's all whales in healthcare in when you're going to the big guys. Unless, of course, you want to get feisty and play in the post-acute side, which is like the ambulatory surgical centers, the independent doctors' offices. They're getting eaten up by the larger systems, but they're still there. They still want to survive. They're still fighting to survive, and they're still underserved. So, that's the only place where healthcare looks a little bit more like B2B elsewhere.
Great. Thanks, Zach.
Great. So I think we had one new listener drop in. So just, to welcome him, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat if they're not addressed, and I'll, monitor that and get your question answered. But so I think, we've all kind of addressed that we're, coming from different backgrounds, right? We have Brad coming from the biomedical engineering and product side, and then the business side kind of meshing. So just Zach, in relation to starting your own business, what kind of, I guess, crucial set of tools or skills would you say are most important for, getting that off the ground and gathering investors and, moving from there?
Yeah, the number one thing is you have to be so passionate about your idea. A lot of people are passionate about the idea of becoming an entrepreneur and passionate about the idea of starting something. Listen, it's a lot of fun, right? It's a very different experience. It's a way to learn a lot more quickly if you do it right, or if you do it wrong. But that passion has to extend in order to be a founder. That passion has to be 110% towards the product or the service you're delivering, because you have to want to talk about it all the time. You want to have to live with it. It is going to, no matter how great your idea is and how great your execution is, it is going to be a roller coaster. You have to be willing to kind of slam into the walls, because they're going to come, and they're going to come over and over and over again. So the number one thing you have to have is be passionate. And that passion has to be so much that if someone tells you that your idea isn't good, someone you trust, someone you really value, you have to be like, no, here's why it's good. And they tell you no, and you're like, no, here's why. You have to want to talk about it with everyone. You have to want to tell everyone they're wrong if they don't agree with you, because it's going to come down to you. You're going to have to cheerlead your company externally, internally, everywhere, all the time. So the number one thing is passion. And you have to be very confident and enthusiastic about it. And you have to be confident that there's a reason for it to exist. We talked about healthcare is a different one, but anywhere else, right? Anywhere you have to have a reason for why your product is needed, right? Like, you have to be able to say, this is why I have a differentiated view than the marketplace. And this is why I believe. And usually this is why I'm like a little bit negative on people starting something directly at a school as well. If it's a direct to consumer product, everyone's a consumer. Because everyone's a consumer, the space for direct consumer products is the most competitive of anything, because everyone can start a direct consumer product company. Everyone gets those kind of gets exposed to a lot of the same impetus. But if you're doing direct, or if you're doing healthcare, you have to have experience with the problem. So you have to, if you're doing a B2B accounting software startup, if you haven't been in a business's accounting department and you haven't lived it, you're going to get a lot of skepticism that you're capable of doing this. And I would be one of those people that are skeptical, because you have to be in there, you have to live the problems, you have to live the current solutions. And you have to have that experience, and have to have hey, this is my experience that I'm basing this problem being important, and this solution to the problem being the right solution. And so I think it's really important that you have the experience in with what you're starting. And then when you go to actually start in terms of the founding team, this isn't going to be a surprise to anyone. Sales is probably going to be one of, if not the most important capabilities of that founding team. That doesn't mean you can't be a founder, a engineer founder, a hardware founder. Those are always going to be, frankly, I want to say the hardest to find, right? The people with the hard skill sets are incredibly challenged and incredibly high demand. But early on, that product needs to be good enough, but you also need to force your way to open doors. So you're going to need someone selling on your behalf if you don't want to do it yourself. That can be a co-founder that's sales oriented. That can be if you get someone that really buys into the technology you're doing. That's an institutional individual, whether it be someone in a innovation department, an investor, and they say, hey, I'll bridge that gap from the sales side, so we don't have to spend a lot of equity or cash early on the sales co-founder. You just need someone that's capable of getting past those closed doors. So sales is a really, really big really big piece of it. So that's the side I come from. But you obviously can't get it done without a good product. So you need the engineering talent, and you need experience on how to deliver a product as well. At some point. And I think that something that someone once said to me is you want to minimize variables. So there's like market risk, product risk, and execution risk is, I think, the three components they had the most. So market risk is like, is this solution actually needed? There's product risk, which is like kind of a technology thing, like, is this a new technology? And then there's execution risk, which is like, can this team go out and deliver? If you can narrow it down to one, like, this is an existing technology trying to solve a problem that's already been established as a big problem and people are trying to get it. And the only risk is on like, can this team execute? You're in a great place. Similarly, like if you have a team that has experience executing, you can take a little bit more risk on, this is a new technology or this is a new problem that people are trying to solve. So I think it's helpful to think about it from those angles as well.
Awesome. So I think we have a question from Xiao Yang. So if you want to unmute and ask it.
Yeah, so I'm working with a startup based on the Stanford Medical School, and we have the idea that making an app like the Lavingo, but with more AI stuff. And I happen to know a friend at the Stanford CS, and he knows he's working in a team building an algorithm very similar to our problem, but not the same. So I'm thinking, can I just connect two teams together, and how do I use their technology for our development later? Yeah.
So it's maybe not existing technology, but maybe it's still kind of in development phase, but they're solving in essence parallel problems, but maybe in different industries, or they're focusing a solution on different problems, and so there's different go-to-markets.
Yeah, there are different problems, but since we are using the same technology, deep learning, so it can be using like interchangeably.
So like I'm not a legal IP expert in any way, shape, or form. We'll surface that. But if you in essence think, hey, we're gonna be iterating on a similar algorithm that they are, I would just have a conversation with them saying, hey, let's tag team some iterations on this algorithm. Usually, especially early on, man, it gets really risky if either side decides to get like protective over their technology. So that's where like I would probably paper up something. I would probably get some sort of legal agreement that says, hey, we're working together on this. Neither side owns a component of the other's solution, despite working together on it. Or you could even theoretically paper up something that says, by working together, we get a 5% ownership in the other person's endeavor so that you align outcomes. But thinking about it, I would probably put something slightly legal on the table that shows that you guys are collaborating, but that collaboration implies no ownership and there's no exclusion from your ability to use things you learn from the other side and they learn from you. If you get something super friendly, right? Like super friendly. If you get something on there that's super friendly that both sides agree and are excited about, then you just ride out that collaboration until one side stops being excited about it. And as long as you had like a nice, like clean agreement that like, hey, when one side wants out, you want out, both sides own their own IP, you return any non-public information at that point in time. I think that you could get that to work, and then you could have two teams that are excited to work with each other. Frankly, I think a likely outcome if you do that is that one team's problem gets more traction than the other, and then potentially at some point in time, you guys decide, hey, this one's more exciting for everyone to work with, and everyone starts working towards the same goal. Or both teams get traction, and both teams say, hey, we want to focus on this exclusively, and you separate out. You just got to make sure that the structure is there so that if either side wants to separate, they can do so cleanly without either side being beholden to the other for something, whether it be permission to continue using the technology that you jointly collaborated on. But once again, it's, you want to make sure both sides are excited going in. You want to keep it friendly. You want to make sure that as long as both sides are excited going forward, that there's there's a good infrastructure to do that. But there's a little bit of CYA, cover your ass, in terms of making sure that there's no sort of rights. And I think I don't know whether this is something that Michael and Doug's team ever does in terms of conversations, but I know they have some legal people at Veale that I know work specifically on these types of issues. I would definitely leverage them, see if you can get pointed towards any, boilerplate agreements or anything like that, or they can just bounce ideas off them. But I do think that's important. You definitely don't want to get tripped up later down the road because one side decides that they actually own all the IP that you've been using. And
yeah. So my initial idea is like we both team working together on this algorithm, because we have the medical expertise and they have the technological expertise. So we're both working on the same algorithm, and it should be the ownership of us, like both. But since you talk about the legal shape, maybe I should talk to our lawyer, and the lawyer's firm will send their lawyer letter to their team, and we can start a collaboration, right?
Well, I mean, if both sides want to work on the same problem, you still want then it changes a little bit of this. Like if they're coming over to work on your problem, because it's like you guys on the medical team that are trying to solve a problem and they have the technology to help you. The biggest challenge is just going to be figuring out what is going to incentivize them to work on your problem. Like if they're just excited to work on a problem and they don't want compensation or ownership, or they want some form of compensation that you're happy with or some level of ownership that you're happy with, great, just dock that up. And that's really easy, right? That's like you dock up an independent contractor agreement where they get a right to compensation, but no right in the IP of the ultimate outcome. Then you're just hiring, but you're hiring an independent contractor, independent technology team to come in and help you out. That's a very well trodden solution. Once again, talk to Michael, talk to Doug, talk to their legal component, and get that through. If it's literally as defined as that, if it's not kind of like an overlapping, we're trying to solve two different problems and helping each other back and forth, that's more complicated. I think that happens less. But you saying, hey, they have a technology to use, how do we do that? Like that's a problem that a lot of people have gone through, and it's kind of up to you a little bit to convince them why working on your problem is worth their time, and not only worth their time, but worth their time at a compensation level that you can afford and you're willing to afford. But that's exactly why, as a founder, you need to be able to sell, right? You got to sell them on why your problem's really exciting and why solving your problem without getting a ton of cash or without getting a ton of ownership is worth it for them and exciting for them. And I've done that. I actually had the algorithm by which we went from being a thermometer that just took temperatures to a thermometer that predicted where a temperature was going to come up within a certain range of accuracy. So it reduced our read time from 2 minutes to seconds. That was developed by my friend who was a master student in machine learning, about to go work at Google. He did it just because he's like, oh, I'm going to solve that issue and I'm going to put it on my resume. It's going to help me get my next job. He solved it. He was the best at solving it, actually. Helped him get his next job. We pretty much didn't compensate him. He didn't ask for compensation, but it was like, this is an interesting problem. This problem's helping people. If you solve it, we'll let you can put anywhere you want that you solve this problem and that you're the foundation of the technology behind this solution that's being used by 100,000 people right now. And that for a lot of people is motivating. And so that's one of those creative ways where you can find ways to align people without having to throw a lot of cash or equity at them.
Yeah, and actually I have another question. Is it better for us to get—
Hey, Xiaoyang, sorry, I love your questions. I'm just checking the time because we're almost out of time. So maybe we'll freeze you on that question. I just want to send it back to Amanda for one final wrap up. But thank you for the great questions. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's actually like a good note to end on, because there was, some good back and forth there and a lot of good information. But thank you, Zach, for your time and for, answering all of these questions. I think it was really helpful. And it was really helpful to me to hear all of this perspective, and everyone else, I'm sure, as well. So Professor Goldberg, I'll throw it to you. I don't know if we have time for Xiaoyang's question, but I'll turn it over.
Yeah, I just wanted to be thoughtful and respectful of Zach's time, and I have a couple of announcements. Zach, thank you for doing this. Another great session, and we really appreciate you being a resource to our community in a world and I know you'll be in Cleveland for a little while longer. We're, when ThinkBox is back up and running, I know we're thrilled about your move to Cleveland and being present with people. So we have to do all these things virtually for now, but thank you very much for doing this. It's really appreciate it.
Can't wait to talk to everyone in person. And Amanda, once again, thanks for attempting to keep me in check here. Obviously, I love and for the great questions, everyone. And I'm sure if you have additional questions, Michael wants to do announcements now. If you have additional questions later, Michael and Doug can serve as handoff coordinators.